The story of HMS Atalanta does not begin with mystery. It begins with wood, iron, salt, war, and the restless heartbeat of an empire expanding across the seas. The year was 1775. Great Britain was standing at the very edge of an upheaval that would shake the world, the American War of Independence. In the shipyards of the Royal Navy, the smell of tar and sawdust mixed with urgency. Carpenters worked relentlessly, pounding iron nails into oak beams. Masts rose like spears pointing against the sky. Shipwrights shouted orders as newly cut planks were carried into place. The Navy needed ships. Not only the massive warships that would anchor great fleets, but the smaller, sharper vessels, the sleeker predators of the empire. Among these vessels were the sloops of war, the eyes and ears of Britain on the ocean, swift, agile, designed to navigate shallow waters and chase down smugglers and privateers. And among these ships, one would eventually carve its name into the deepest silence of the Atlantic, HMS Atalanta. She was a modest vessel, roughly 200 tons, armed with about 14 guns, built not to dominate the seas, but to serve them faithfully, quickly, and without hesitation. She was never meant to be a legend. She was built to be useful. But history often chooses unlikely vessels for its greatest mysteries. By 1775, tensions between Britain and the American colonies had reached their breaking point. Whispers of rebellion became shouts. The first shots had already echoed, and the Royal Navy braced itself. Sloops like Atalanta were crucial to the war effort. Large ships civilian were powerful but difficult to maneuver close to shore. The American coastline was riddled with inlets, shoals, rivers, and narrow passages, places only a small, fast ship could navigate. Atalanta was exactly the kind of vessel Britain needed. Her crew was assembled from seasoned sailors, some veterans of merchant ships, others from naval service. These were not aristocrats. They were men hardened by storms, hunger, discipline, and the unpredictable moods of the sea. Once armed and provisioned, Atalanta slipped into the Atlantic, not knowing she had begun a journey that would end not in glory, but in disappearance. For years, HMS Atalanta patrolled the waters of North America, sailing from New England, New York, Chesapeake Bay, Virginia, the Carolinas, the Bahamas, Bermuda. She chased smugglers, intercepted colonial vessels, escorted supply ships, and carried dispatches between British forces. Her missions were rarely glamorous, but always essential. And though she did not earn fame through great battles, she earned respect as a reliable workhorse of the British fleet. But war is unpredictable. And in 1781, Atalanta found herself facing a foe she could not outrun. On September 28, 1781, near Cape Henry, Atalanta engaged with the American frigate USS Alliance, commanded by John Barry, a formidable figure in American naval history. The confrontation was swift and unforgiving. The Alliance was larger, faster, and outgunned Atalanta by a wide margin. The British sloop fought bravely, but she stood no chance against the firepower bearing down upon her. Her sails were torn, her masts splintered, her hull shuddered under the assault. Eventually the order was given: strike the colors, surrender. HMS Atalanta, once a loyal instrument of British power, was now a prize of war. Her capture symbolized the rising strength of the American Navy and exposed the vulnerability of even the most experienced British crews. The Americans refitted the ship, placed her back into service, and used her for their purposes. A ship that had once hunted them was now part of their fleet. As the war neared its end, the Atalanta changed hands yet again. British forces eventually regained control, either through recapture or post-war arrangements. But something had changed. The Atalanta that returned to the Royal Navy was no longer fresh, reliable, or pristine. She had endured storms, battles, capture, repair, structural damage, years of relentless service, and sailors, notoriously superstitious, whispered among themselves. They said ships that served two flags were never the same. They said vessels captured in war carried memories. They said Atalanta had crossed too many thresholds for her own good. She had been struck by enemy fire. She had surrendered. She had sailed under two nations. And in the minds of sailors, that alone could be a curse. After 1783, when the war officially ended, Atalanta resumed her duties, but age had taken its toll. Historical records suggest she required frequent repairs, constant maintenance, reinforcement of beams, replacement of rigging. Her hull creaked more. Her handling worsened. Her seaworthiness diminished. But Britain still needed ships, even the weary ones. So Atalanta continued serving in transport missions, dispatch runs, patrols near British colonies, routine and unspectacular tasks. Yet every voyage pushed her closer to the edge, and then came the final mission. At some point in the early 1780s, Atalanta sailed from England across the Atlantic once more. Destination: the waters near Bermuda, one of the most strategically important British territories at the time. Her orders were routine. Nothing suggested danger. No storms were recorded in British ports before her departure. But somewhere along her route, the Atalanta vanished. Not a single survivor, not a single lifeboat, not a single identifiable piece of wreckage. Just silence. A silence so complete, so overwhelming that the disappearance entered the annals of maritime mystery. The area where Atalanta disappeared is the same region that, centuries later, would become known as the Bermuda Triangle. But at the time, there was no myth, only danger. This part of the Atlantic is notorious for violent storms, unpredictable winds, rapid shifts in weather, deadly currents, treacherous reefs, deep oceanic trenches. Many ships disappeared there long before Atalanta. Many would disappear after her. But she became one of the most mysterious cases because nothing was ever found. No fragment, no clue, no explanation. Her disappearance was total, and total disappearances create something stronger than fear, legend. HMS Atalanta's story is not about heroism, victory, or glory. It is about the fragility of human effort against the immensity of the sea. Her legacy lies not in what she accomplished, but in what she became, a symbol of maritime disappearance, one of the earliest documented vanishings in the Bermuda-region, a vessel swallowed by silence, a foundation for later myths, a reminder that the sea takes what it wants. Her absence is her voice, her end unknown, her story unforgettable. And this marks only the beginning. To understand the disappearance of the HMS Atalanta, we must first understand the theater in which her final tragedy unfolded, the North Atlantic, one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. It is a sea of extremes. One moment calm as polished glass, glowing under the morning light. The next, a battlefield of towering waves, roaring winds, and storms that appear without warning. Sailors of the 18th century feared this region not because of superstition, but because of experience. The North Atlantic, especially the corridor between England, Bermuda, and the American coast, is shaped by forces that modern science only later began to understand. The Gulf Stream, a colossal river of warm water flowing within the ocean. The Labrador Current, icy and violent, colliding head-on with the Gulf Stream rapid pressure drops, forming storms in hours, vertical winds capable of shredding canvas, hidden coral reefs near Bermuda, deep ocean trenches descending into darkness. The Atalanta sailed straight into this chaos, and she sailed blind. No radar, no radio, no weather charts, no satellites, no early warnings. In the 18th century, this part of the Atlantic was not merely dangerous, it was a labyrinth where countless ships vanished, leaving nothing but speculation in their wake. Atalanta became one of them. One of the most important aspects often forgotten about HMS Atalanta is this: she was not in ideal condition when she set sail for the final time. Historical records reveal she was an aging ship, battle-damaged, repaired multiple times, structurally weakened, showing signs of hull deterioration, heavily strained after years of service. Captured by the Americans in 1781, later recaptured by the British, and then pushed back into duty, Atalanta had undergone makeshift repairs, emergency patches, quick reinforcements, temporary masts and beams, rushed reconditioning. Ships in the age of sail had short lifespans, especially sloops. Many were retired after a few years. Atalanta was already far past her prime. Sailors of the era knew the sound of a ship aging, a groan in the beams, a shudder in the deck, a vibration through the masts. These were not merely sounds, they were warnings. And Atalanta had been sounding those warnings for years. Life aboard a sloop of war like Atalanta was harsh. Her crew lived in cramped quarters, slept in hammocks, and endured constant wetness, cold, hunger, and fatigue. But beyond hardship, there was a bond, a deep, instinctive bond between sailors and the ships that carried them. Sailors felt when a ship was unhealthy. They sensed her weaknesses. Some journals from other vessels of the era describe how sailors often believed ships had personalities, even souls. A strong ship protected her crew. A weak ship resisted the sea. A dying ship called to the depths. Superstition, perhaps. But for sailors who lived and died by the mood of the ocean, superstition was a survival mechanism. Some would later say that Atalanta was tired. Others said she carried two flags worth of memories. Others believed she had been wounded in battle and never truly healed. And then came the final voyage, the voyage no sailor survives to describe. The technology aboard Atalanta was primitive by today's standards. No longitude calculations until the late century, no accurate clocks, no consistent barometers, no weather maps, no storm prediction, no exit mode radio communication, no emergency signals. Navigation relied on stars, sun, instinct, dead reckoning, experience, luck. If clouds covered the sky for even a day or two, Atalanta could drift miles off course without anyone realizing. Fog could swallow a ship whole. A sudden gust could snap the masts. A rogue wave could overturn her in seconds. And Atalanta, weakened as she was, had little margin for error. She was sailing through one of the most volatile regions on Earth, with the odds already against her. The route from England to Bermuda passes through a meteorological minefield. Scientists later discovered that the region is prone to rapid cyclogenesis, storms that form out of nowhere due to sudden changes in temperature. Vertical downdrafts, powerful downward winds that can crush ships, microbursts, localized storms that explode from the sky like detonations. Rogue waves, single, monstrous waves that can reach 20 to 30 meters. Ocean eddies, massive spinning rings of water that destabilize vessels. Sudden wind shifts capable of tearing sails or capsizing small sloops. The combination of these forces forms one of the world's most dangerous marine corridors. Atalanta entered this region in the worst possible condition. damaged, slow, structurally compromised, with low freeboard making her prone to taking on water. She was a ship waiting for a single mistake, a mistake the ocean would not forgive. Without survivors or wreckage, historians study what could have happened. Here are the leading theories supported by maritime experts. Theory 1. A sudden storm overwhelmed the ship. This is the most widely accepted theory. A storm forms quickly. The wind shifts violently. The ship heels, takes on water, and within minutes she capsizes. Small ships do not survive these events, especially aging ones. Atalanta may have sunk so fast that no signal, flare, or distress call could be made. Theory 2. Structural failure of an aging hull. Years of stress may have weakened her. Beams, knees, hull planking, keel masts, joints. A single wave or impact could split the hull, especially near Bermuda where reefs are unforgiving. If the hull ruptured, she would sink immediately. Theory 3. Grounding on hidden reefs. Bermuda is surrounded by a maze of razor-sharp coral, shallow sandbanks, underwater ridges. One wrong turn, especially at night, and the ship would tear open her bottom. The crew would have no chance. Theory 4. Capsize from a sudden squall. A sudden white squall, a violent wind-only storm, could strike without warning. The ship would heel sharply, her masts could snap, she would roll and not recover. Theory 5. Foundering from water accumulation with old planking and weak seams. Atalanta may have slowly taken on water. The crew pumps could not keep up. The ship became heavy, unstable. One wave finished the job. This is the core of the mystery. Why no wreckage? The answer lies in the terrible geography. Extreme depth, rapid currents, coral reefs that crush and consume, wood storms that scatter debris, the Gulf Stream carrying fragments for thousands of miles. If a ship sinks in shallow water, wrecks remain. If she sinks in deep ocean trenches, she simply disappears. Atalanta likely slid into one of these trenches, out of sight, out of reach, out of history even today. With advanced sonar, we still cannot map every corner of the abyss. The Atlantic holds more secrets than we can imagine. Atalanta became one of them. When months passed with no sign of the ship, the Royal Navy reluctantly concluded the obvious. HMS Atalanta was lost at sea, but the silence was unsettling. No survivors, no floating debris, no reports from other ships, just a sudden total erasure. This was rare, even then, and rare events become myths. Soon whispers circulated. Ships don't vanish like that. It's as if she was swallowed whole. And over decades the Atalanta drifted from history into legend. It would take many years before writers began connecting the dots between the Atalanta but the seeds were planted here. This was the earliest recorded disappearance in that part of the Atlantic where many others would later vanish. That Atalanta became, unknowingly, the first chapter in a story that would grow into one of the world's greatest maritime mysteries, and her silence would echo for centuries. When HMS Atalanta vanished, she left behind more than an empty space in naval records. She left behind a shape, a kind of outline into which, over the next 2 centuries, other disappearances would fit perfectly. In her time, the loss was simply tragic. But with every passing decade, as more ships met their end in that same stretch of ocean, Atalanta's disappearance transformed. It ceased to be a solitary event. It became the beginning of a pattern. History often builds backward. We look at what happens later, and suddenly the past takes on new meaning. The Atalanta became the prologue to a much larger story, a story of storms, vanished ships, missing crews, and a region whose reputation would one day become global. But back in the 1780s, all that existed was the silence, a silence that would only deepen over time. The phrase Bermuda Triangle would not be invented for almost 200 years, but sailors did not need modern labels. They knew danger when they saw it, and long before Atalanta disappeared, mariners whispered about the patch of ocean between Bermuda, the Bahamas, Florida. It was a place of sudden storms, dead calms, violent waves, treacherous currents, coral reefs that broke ships like twigs, waters so deep that wrecks were swallowed whole. But these warnings were not scientific. They were passed from sailor to sailor, quietly, privately, out of superstition or caution. The British Navy charted the region with great care, yet still feared it. And when Atalanta disappeared, the fear grew stronger. It was not the first ship to vanish there, and it certainly would not be the last. But Atalanta would become the most historically significant, because her disappearance was documented, recorded, preserved, a rare thing in the 1700s. After Atalanta vanished, the decades brought more disappearances, some known, many forgotten, all terrifying for the sailors of the era. Historical research shows that the region saw the loss of merchant brigs, naval sloops, privateer vessels, Spanish treasure ship escorts, American coastal schooners, French corsair ships, countless unregistered craft, although not all were documented with precision. The number is staggering. Ships vanished, without reports, without distress signals, without floating wreckage. And as the list of disappearances grew, so did the sense that something about this region of ocean was fundamentally hostile. HMS Atalanta was simply the first disappearance people could point to with detailed records, and because history preserved her name, she became the anchor point, the first entry in a timeline of tragedies. As the 1800s unfolded, maritime activity exploded, global trade routes expanded, steam power was introduced, warships evolved rapidly, exploration increased, and with this expansion came more vanishings. British naval reports from the 19th century mention at least 7 small vessels lost near Bermuda under mysterious conditions. American newspapers remarked on schooners swallowed by storms, brigs missing without explanation, vessels that left port and never arrived. Many of these vanishings mirrored the Atalanta case. Small ship, weakened structure, entered some form of storm, disappeared without leaving any trace. With every loss, the region gained a darker reputation. Sailors began calling it the Devil's Waters, the grave of ships, the blind spot of the Atlantic, the mouth of the deep. These were not scientific terms, they were warnings and confessions. Because every sailor knew there were places in the ocean where ships went in and never came out. Atalanta's name began appearing in early maritime writings as an example of such tragedies. One of the key reasons Atalanta remains iconic is that no sound or rumor followed her disappearance. Most shipwrecks of the era generated at least rumors, sightings of debris, survivor stories, reports from nearby vessels, washed up timbers, sails on distant shores, but Atalanta produced nothing, absolute nothingness. The ocean did not return. A piece of mast, a barrel, a rope, a splinter of hull, a lifeboat. For many sailors, this silence was more terrifying than any storm. Silence meant the sea had claimed everything. And silence meant that whatever force consumed the Atalanta had also consumed all evidence of her fate. This kind of disappearance, total, immediate, without witnesses, was not just rare. It was unnatural, at least, to the minds of the men of her time. A mystery is not built on facts. It is built on missing facts. Everything we do not know about the Atalanta becomes a space the imagination fills. Sailors of the 18th and 19th centuries speculated, was it a storm so violent the ship went down in minutes? Did she hit a reef and shatter before anyone could react? Did she break apart due to her age? Was the crew overwhelmed? Did the Gulf Stream drag her into a trench? But other sailors, the more superstitious, whispered darker theories. The sea wanted her back. She was paying a debt for changing hands in war. Some ships are born unlucky. The Atalanta became a story. Sailors told other sailors a warning wrapped in silence, not because they knew what happened, but because they didn't. It wasn't until the 20th century, long after Atalanta had been forgotten by official history, that writers and investigators rediscovered her. When researchers began studying the USS Cyclops Flight 19, the Carroll A. Deering, various missing fishing fleets, merchant ships that vanished in the 1900s, they traced earlier records of unusual disappearances. And in the British Admiralty archives, they found something startling. One of the earliest documented vanishings in that region was the HMS Atalanta. Suddenly, she wasn't just a forgotten sloop. She became the earliest puzzle piece, the first historically confirmed disappearance, the oldest ghost ship case of the area, the seed of what would one day be called the Bermuda Triangle myth. Writers began referencing her in maritime studies, books on ocean mysteries, articles on unexplained disappearances, radio programs, documentaries. Her name rose from obscurity not because of what she did, but because of the mystery of how she ended. By the mid-20th century, Atalanta had undergone a transformation. She was no longer just a war sloop, just a captured and recaptured vessel, just another ship lost at sea. She had become something else, a symbol of the unpredictability of the ocean, the vulnerability of human technology, the silence of the deep, the darkness of uncharted waters, the ancient pattern of vanishing ships, the origin of a legend that would one day captivate the world. Her disappearance was no longer an isolated tragedy. It was now part of a timeline stretching across centuries. And Atalanta became the opening chapter, the warning sign people ignored. As the Bermuda Triangle myth exploded in popular culture through books, TV programs, documentaries, magazines, HMS Atalanta became a recurring figure. She represented the early days of unexplained vanishings, the pre-scientific era of maritime loss, the age before radio and rescue, the origin point of the region's sinister reputation. Atalanta symbolizes everything that frightens humans about the ocean: the unknown, the unseen, the unknowable, and more than any other element. Her story carries one last haunting truth: she did not vanish into mystery. She created it. For more than a century, the HMS Atalanta was nothing more than a silent entry in the Royal Navy's list of ships lost at sea, a footnote, a brief line, a name without a story. But the 20th and 21st centuries changed everything. As new maritime mysteries emerged and as technology advanced, researchers began looking backward, seeking patterns across time. The ocean, once feared but poorly understood, became a place to investigate, map, measure, and decode. And in this new age of exploration, Atalanta resurfaced, not physically, but intellectually. Historians, oceanographers, marine archaeologists, and disaster analysts began asking, what really happened to Atalanta? Could her fate be reconstructed scientifically? Does her case hold clues to the nature of other disappearances? Could she still be found? Slowly, her story, once a ghost, became a scientific puzzle. one of the earliest full disappearances ever documented, a ship that vanished without a trace, a vessel that predates the Bermuda Triangle myth by centuries, yet fits the pattern perfectly. And so, the Atalanta moved from forgotten casualty to subject of serious study. Today, researchers study the Atalanta with tools the 18th century could never have imagined. Satellite oceanography, deep-sea sonar mapping, underwater drones, ROVs and AUVs, historical weather reconstructions, bathymetric scans of the ocean floor, advanced modeling of ship stability, simulations of storm patterns, archival database analysis. These tools allow scientists to reconstruct potential storm pathways from the year she vanished, simulate the ship's behavior under stress, calculate how quickly she could have sunk, map the seafloor where she likely lies, analyze drift patterns for debris, compare her disappearance with other historical cases. And although these tools bring precision, they also reveal a painful truth. The area where the Atalanta sank is one of the least forgiving environments on Earth. Even with gaps in historical data, modern science can recreate probable conditions. Step 1. Determine the time frame. Most records suggest Atalanta disappeared sometime in the early 1780s, likely between winter of 1780s, summer of 1781, possibly as late as early 1782. Step to identify her route. Ships sailing from England to Bermuda followed well-known currents, the North Atlantic Drift, the Canary Current, the Gulf Stream, seasonal winds. Step 3. Cross-reference with known weather patterns. Using ice-core data, ship logs from other vessels, and climate models, scientists identified major storms that may have formed along that corridor. Step 4. Evaluate ship condition. Her age, damage, repairs, and structural weakness all contributed to her vulnerability. Step 5. Simulate impacts. Oceanographic models suggest that even a moderate storm could have capsized her, sent her into a deep trench, destroyed her hull completely, scattered any floating debris. Atalanta encountered a violent weather event she could not withstand. To understand why the Atalanta was never found, we must understand the nature of the seabed near Bermuda. It is not flat. It is not gently sloping. It is a landscape of massive undersea cliffs, trenches as deep as 7,000 meters, coral mountains, sudden drop-offs, sediment avalanches, a place so hostile no diver can reach it without machines. Most ships that sink near Bermuda do not rest gently on the bottom. They vanish into this undersea labyrinth. And the Atalanta, a fragile wooden sloop, likely broke apart, collapsed inward, slid down a trench, was buried under sediment, or decayed entirely in the warm salt water. Even with today's equipment, such a wreck is nearly impossible to locate. In the vast ocean, a ship the size of Atalanta is equivalent to a lost toothpick in a stadium of sand. Modern researchers consider several explanations for the disappearance. Here are the scientifically evaluated theories. Theory A. A fast-forming cyclone. The region is known for cyclogenesis, storms forming rapidly due to colliding currents. Simulations show that a sudden cyclone could tear Atalanta's sails, break her masts, flood her lower decks, sink her within minutes. If she was caught in such an event, no survivors and no debris is the expected outcome. Theory B. Structural failure of a weakened hull. Atalanta's years of service weakened her. Beams, joints, keel structure, hull planking, mast supports. A single strong wave could have cracked the hull. Water would rush in. She would sink fast. Theory C. Capsizing due to top-heavy rigging. Ships of her type, when improperly loaded or aged, could become top-heavy. A sudden shift of wind could flip her. Sails fill violently. Ship heels, cargo shifts, water floods. She capsizes. Death would be immediate. Theory D. Collision with reefs. Bermuda is notorious for reefs just beneath the surface. If Atalanta struck one, hull rips open, ship veers, rapid flooding, masts snap, vessel breaks apart. Again, no time for escape. Theory E. Foundering after a pump failure. If water slowly filled the hold and the pumps failed, the ship becomes heavy, stability decreases. Crew exhausts itself, next storm wave pushes her under. This is a common cause of old ship losses. At first glance, Atalanta is just one of thousands of ships lost in the age of sail. But scientists value her case for several reasons. 1. It is one of the earliest well-documented vanishings in a high-risk zone. This allows researchers to study patterns of historical ship losses. 2. It occurred in a region with extreme oceanographic complexity, perfect for analyzing interactions of storms and currents. 3. The total absence of debris provides insight into deep-ocean wreck behavior. 4. It helps establish a historical baseline for understanding modern disappearances. 5. It highlights the limitations of wooden ships in volatile environments. Atalanta's loss contributes to marine hazard modeling, weather prediction science, ocean current mapping, archaeological search strategy, risk assessment for small vessels. Few shipwrecks provide such a unique combination of documented history, total disappearance, and geographical significance. Despite the challenges, some researchers believe Atalanta could still be found, especially with future advancements such as ultra-deep AUVs, long-range sonar, drones, AI-driven seafloor scanning, quantum molecular residue detectors. If located, her wreck could reveal construction techniques, evidence of final damage, the nature of her sinking, artifacts of her crew. But for now, the most likely truth is that she lies deep, shattered, buried, consumed by time. The sea rarely returns the dead. There is a profound psychological effect associated with disappearances like the Atalanta. Humans can accept death, we can accept shipwrecks, we can accept loss. But what humans struggle to accept is absence without explanation. When something vanishes, the mind searches for answers. Imagination fills the void, myth replaces fact, speculation breeds mystery, becomes myth. This is why Atalanta haunts the imagination. It is not the tragedy itself, it is the unfinished story, the lack of a final chapter, the absence of evidence, the enduring question, where did she go? The human mind demands closure. The ocean refuses to provide it. And so the Atalanta remains psychologically powerful. Atalanta's story forces us to confront a deeper truth. The ocean is not a villain, but it is beyond our control. Humans build ships. We map the seas. We name currents and winds, but the ocean does not care. It does not negotiate. It does not remember. It does not grieve. The Atalanta's disappearance is a reminder that we are temporary, our knowledge is incomplete, our technology has limits, the natural world dwarfs us in the end. Atalanta is more than a shipwreck. She is a symbol of the fragile line between exploration and risk, knowledge and mystery, presence and absence, certainty and fear. When she sank, she took her answers with her, and the ocean kept them. The disappearance of HMS Atalanta began as a simple tragedy. A small naval sloop, battered by years of war and weather, vanished in a treacherous region of the Atlantic. At the time, it was not a mystery, it was a loss. Ships sank. Storms killed, the sea consumed. But as generations passed, and as the world changed, something remarkable happened. The Atalanta's quiet vanishing slowly transformed into a myth, not because of what was known, but because of what was never found. Myth is born in silence, and Atalanta left behind one of the greatest silences in maritime history. By the mid-1800s, the ocean was no longer just a route for trade and war. It had become a stage for imagination. Books, travel journals, and maritime told tales painted the sea as a living thing, a keeper of secrets, a devourer of ships, a kingdom of ghosts, a territory where nature behaved unpredictably. It was the era that birthed the Flying Dutchman, ghost ship stories, supernatural, sea legends, sea monster folklore, early speculation about haunted waters. Writers loved stories where ships vanished without explanation, and Atalanta, with her perfectly clean disappearance, fit this genre effortlessly. Historians began mentioning her as an example of a lost sloop, a mysterious absence, a ship that vanished offshore, a case without debris. She became a literary reference point long before anyone connected her to a larger pattern. It is ironic but true. The period when Atalanta was forgotten was exactly the period when her myth began forming. For nearly a century, her story drifted below the surface of public memory. She was not discussed, not investigated, not debated, just gone. But in that absence, something important happened. Every new disappearance in the same region retroactively strengthened her story. Each vanished ship, whether in the 1800s or early 1900s, seemed to echo the Atalanta. And without anyone intending it, she became the oldest stone in a pyramid of mysteries, the earliest documented vanishing, the prototype of a pattern sailors feared. It is only when we look back that we see the chain. Atalanta gives 1800s brigs, gives 19th century schooners, gives early 20th century cargo ships, gives USS Cyclops, gives Flight 19, gives the modern myth. Her story was the first whisper in a rising storm. In 1964, writer Vincent Gaddis published an article that coined the term the Bermuda Triangle. Suddenly, the world had a name for a phenomenon sailors had feared for centuries. Researchers began digging into naval archives, disappearance logs, shipping records, historic storm data, and what they found stunned them. One of the earliest recorded disappearances in the region was the HMS Atalanta, 1780s. This elevated her from obscurity to central importance. She wasn't just another ship lost at sea. She was the first chapter of the story the world now recognized as a legend. Documentary producers, authors, and journalists seized upon her case. An early triangle mystery, the first Bermuda Triangle disappearance, the ship that vanished centuries before the myth existed. The Atalanta suddenly became a historical anchor in the narrative of the triangle, and she has remained there ever since. During the 1960s, 1990s, the Atalanta appeared in books on maritime mysteries, television documentaries, magazine features, radio programs, conferences on unexplained disappearances, academic discussions on ocean hazards, fictionalized retellings, speculative articles. Most publications focused on key factors: no debris, no survivors, no storm reports, no recorded distress, no confirmed wreckage, a treacherous region. A ship in poor condition, this combination was irresistible. She became a symbol of the unexplained, not because she was the most dramatic disappearance, but because she was the earliest, most perfectly mysterious one. The public became fascinated with the idea that something ancient, something persistent, something almost alive lurked in that part of the Atlantic. And Atalanta was the first ship it claimed. As her story spread through pop culture, less credible theories began to emerge. Writers trying to sell books or TV ratings exaggerated details or invented new ones, claiming the Atalanta was cursed, the crew mutinied, the ship was seized by pirates, strange lights were seen eerie. Weather occurred, supernatural forces intervened, magnetic anomalies destroyed her, undersea vortices swallowed her. None of these claims had any historical basis. They were fabrications built on the appealing absence of facts. But these sensational stories helped cement the Atalanta's place in pop culture. She became a myth. And myths do not require accuracy, only fascination. As sensational stories grew, scientists pushed back. Oceanographers, meteorologists, and maritime historians conducted studies to show hurricanes and tropical storms frequently hit the region. The Gulf Stream disperses wreckage quickly. The seabed is too deep for debris to surface. Wooden ships disintegrate rapidly in warm water. Sudden squalls can sink vessels instantly. Visibility in storms is near zero. Coral reefs can tear ships apart. Old sloops were extremely vulnerable. They also compared the Atalanta with other historical disappearances, finding similar patterns. Still, the public often ignored scientific explanations because the mystery was more compelling than the truth, and the Atalanta lived on, not in academic papers, but in imagination. Today, more than 200 years later, the HMS Atalanta remains discussed, researched, debated, written about. The subject of documentaries referenced in Triangle studies, used as a teaching example in oceanography, cited in naval history lectures. Few ships lost in the 18th century received this level of attention. Most are forgotten, but Atalanta endures for one reason. She vanished so perfectly that people cannot let her go. She is the embodiment of the unsolved, the unrecovered, the unexplained. The deeper one studies her disappearance, the more she seems to recede, like a shadow pulled deeper into the abyss. Her myth grows because her evidence does not. HMS Atalanta is more than a ghost story. Her legacy continues to resonate because she represents the eternal tension between human ambition, technological limits, natural power, historical memory, scientific understanding, cultural mythology. Her story teaches us how legends form, how fear spreads, how the ocean humbles humanity, how absence becomes more powerful than presence, how a forgotten ship can become immortal, and above all, Atalanta reminds us that the ocean is not merely a place, it is a force that shapes stories as much as it shapes continents. The story of the HMS Atalanta is not only a maritime mystery, it is a reflection of something profound about human nature. What terrifies us is not merely death, or disaster, or storms. What truly shakes the human soul is vanishing. To disappear without witness, without explanation, without remains, without final words. Humans fear the void, and the ocean more than any place on earth creates voids. That Atalanta did not just sink. She vanished into that void, a reminder that the ocean is capable of erasing even the memory of existence. This fear is ancient, deep, instinctive. When a ship goes down and leaves no trace, it does not only disappear from the sea, it disappears from meaning. And that is why the Atalanta still haunts us. Human beings seek stories. We need narratives, beginnings, middles, and ends. But the Atalanta gives us a beginning, a middle, and a missing end. This breaks the structure our minds rely on. Studies in psychology show that unsolved events trigger greater emotional intensity, deeper long-term interest, persistent imagination, obsession with details, fear mixed with curiosity, the creation of myths to fill the gap. The Atalanta is a perfect example. Had she wrecked on shore, or left survivors, or produced debris, her story would be complete, closed, archived. But she left nothing, and when the mind encounters nothing, it creates something. For the sailors of the 18th and 19th centuries, the ocean was both a livelihood and a graveyard. But most sailors accepted death at sea. What they did not accept was a death without burial, a grave without location, a farewell without witnesses, a ship swallowed whole. The Atalanta became the embodiment of this fear. Her disappearance created superstitions, that the sea could claim a ship, that certain waters were cursed, that storms had intentions, that some voyages were doomed before they began. Even in modern interviews with sailors, one can hear echoes of those ancient fears. I can accept sinking, but I cannot accept disappearing. This is why Atalanta's story did not fade. It represents the ultimate maritime nightmare. Most historical tragedies lose emotional force as they age, but the Atalanta is an exception. Why? Because she embodies universal themes. Uncertainty, fragility, the unknown, the human struggle against nature, the power of silence, the weight of unanswered questions. Her story transcends her era. Even today, in a world of satellites and global communication, ships and planes still disappear. The MV Derbyshire, the bulk carrier Yongxing 56, The Argentine submarine, ARA, San Juan, Malaysia. Airlines flight MH370. Each of these modern disappearances reopens the wound that the Atalanta represents. The ocean is still beyond our control, and sometimes, beyond our understanding. Atalanta is not merely a historical event, she is a timeless omen. Many philosophers and psychologists have noted that humanity projects its deepest fears and desires onto the ocean. Carl Jung referred to the sea as the symbol of the collective unconscious. The ocean is vast, is dark, is layered, hides things, reveals selectively, is unpredictable, cannot be controlled like the unconscious. When Atalanta vanished into the deep, she did not simply disappear physically. She slipped into the symbolic realm, a place where our fears live, our myths form, our imagination fills gaps, our explanations become stories. This is why her mystery feels alive. It is not the ship that haunts us, it is what she represents, a part of ourselves we cannot reach. Humans have an innate need to explain the unknown. When we cannot find truth, we create truths. This is why the Atalanta accumulated so many speculative theories over centuries. Supernatural vortices, magnetic anomalies, sea monsters, curses, spirits of drowned sailors, unnatural fog, dimensional rifts, none of these have evidence, but they are compelling because they transform the unbearable, the lack of answers, into something we can narrate. A mystery is better than a void. A story is better than silence. Even an impossible explanation comforts more than none. This need is universal. It existed in the 18th century. It exists today. And the Atalanta sits right at the intersection of history, fear, and imagination. Every disappearance at sea leaves behind grief. But grief has stages based on certainty. The families of Atalanta's crew did not have certainty. They received no bodies, no wreckage, no final message, no timeline of events, no place to mourn. Psychologists call this ambiguous loss the most painful form of grief, because the mind cannot resolve it. The Atalanta's families endured hope that slowly died, fear that slowly grew, imagination that never rested, unresolved trauma passed through generations. Even today, this emotional imprint shapes how we feel about missing aircraft, lost submarines, vanished boats. A story like Atalanta endures because it is not just history, it is human pain frozen in time. When we ask what happened to the HMS Atalanta, we are not only asking about a ship, we are asking, why do things disappear? Why does nature erase stories? Why does the universe allow unanswered questions? Why do some tragedies leave no trace? Why do we fear the unknown so deeply? The Atalanta forces us to confront an unsettling truth. We cannot know everything. Not even with satellites, sonar, drones, robots, science, data archives, research. Some mysteries remain mysteries. This is humbling and frightening and strangely beautiful, because mystery reminds us that the world is not entirely ours. Today, Atalanta is more than a shipwreck story. She has become a metaphor for the limits of human knowledge, the thin line between order and chaos, the fragility of life, the indifference of nature, the permanence of loss, the persistence of memory, the unending search for truth. Writers use her as a symbol in literature, films, documentaries, philosophy courses, psychology texts, oceanography discussions. She represents the idea that not all answers exist, not all stories conclude, not all questions are meant for resolution. The Atalanta's silence is not only maritime, it is existential. As we move deeper into the story of the HMS Atalanta, it becomes clear that her disappearance is not an isolated event. Instead, it forms part of a vast global tapestry woven from shipwrecks, vanishings, and tragedies that transcend eras and cultures. Yet, the Atalanta stands apart, not because her disappearance was the most dramatic, or the most destructive, or the most controversial, but because she represents something unique. She is one of the earliest well-documented cases of total disappearance in an infamously dangerous region. Her story becomes even more compelling when compared with other ships that vanished under mysterious circumstances, not just in Bermuda, but across every ocean humans have ever sailed. This part of the documentary explores how the Atalanta fits into this grand, haunting lineage, and how she helped pave the way for a global fascination with the unknown. Long before terms like ghost ship or Bermuda Triangle existed, sailors routinely faced storms, reefs, mutinies, piracy, fire, disease, structural failure, navigational errors. The ocean was a place of risk, not romance. But whenever ships disappeared without a trace, something different happened in the human mind. When there was no debris, no wreck, no survivors, no explanation, people did not accept it as simple tragedy. They sensed something bigger, something uncanny, something beyond ordinary explanations. The Atalanta became one of the great early examples of this pattern, and this pattern repeated itself around the globe. To understand the Atalanta in context, we must compare her with other legendary disappearances, not for fiction, not for sensationalism, but to understand how the human mind organizes mystery. Here are the major cases often discussed alongside the Atalanta. 1. The Mary Celeste 1872, perhaps the most famous ghost ship in history. Found abandoned intact, provisions untouched, crew vanished. A mystery of absence, much like Atalanta, but with the ship still present. 2. The USS Cyclops 1918, a massive U.S. Navy collier that vanished with 309 men. No wreckage, no distress calls, a tragedy that contributed heavily to the Bermuda Triangle legend. 3. Flight 1945, 5 American bomber planes that disappeared during a training mission. No trace found. The event that truly exploded global fascination with Bermuda for the MV Joyita, 1955, found adrift with missing crew, much like Mary Celeste, a modern echo of old mysteries. 5. The HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, 1845, lost in the Arctic with the Franklin expedition. Though later found, their disappearance shaped national trauma. 6. The SS Waratah, 1909, a Titanic of the southern seas, vanished off South Africa, still unfound. Each case reflects a different aspect of mystery. But the Atalanta stands out because she sits at the beginning of this lineage. She is the proto-mystery, the template, the earliest known case of a modern-style vanishing. Most famous ocean mysteries involve larger ships, more equipment, more passengers, evidence left behind, documented last signals, geographic triangulation, known weather conditions. But Atalanta had none of this. She was small. She was in poor condition. She sailed without modern instruments. She disappeared before meteorology existed. She left no logs after departure. She left no debris. She left no witness accounts. The region was barely charted. The weather was unrecorded. The ocean floor was unmapped. Her loss was so complete and so early that she became an archetype, the perfect maritime disappearance. Every later case, from Cyclops to Flight 19, inevitably echoes her. Even though they differ in scale, technology, and era, they all share a journey into dangerous waters. A sudden loss of contact, an absence of evidence, a legacy of speculation, a transformation from tragedy to myth. Atalanta was the first to define this narrative. Many viewers of this documentary may ask, why do so many disappearances happen in the Atlantic? The answer lies in the brutal combination of 1. The Gulf Stream, a powerful current that can carry debris thousands of kilometers, sink damaged ships, rapidly disperse wreckage beyond detection. 2. Violent weather systems. The Atlantic breeds hurricanes, cyclones, squalls, rogue waves, microbursts. Cold fronts colliding with warm currents. Storms can appear within hours, leaving ships no time to react. 3. The seafloor topography. The Atlantic hides trenches deeper than mountains are tall, underwater cliffs, volcanic slopes, sediment avalanches that bury wrecks. A ship like Atalanta could vanish into a canyon so deep that no technology of her time or even ours could reach it easily. 4. Reefs and shoals. Bermuda alone is surrounded by miles of razor-sharp coral. Shallow reefs, unforgiving sandbanks. These tear wooden holes like paper. 5. The limitations of navigation. 18th century ships were slaves to wind stars, instinct, inaccurate charts. One mistake could mean destruction. Atalanta sailed through a perfect storm of natural dangers, a convergence of deadly elements no small sloop could survive. Historians sometimes describe the Atalanta not as a single event, but as a catalyst. Her disappearance created a template for future mysteries, set a precedent for unexplained vanishings, influenced how people interpret other cases, established a psychological framework of fear-shaped storytelling traditions in maritime culture. To sailors, if one ship can vanish so completely, so can others. 2 authors, a missing ship is a doorway into imagination. 2 scientists, a disappearance without debris is a puzzle to decode. To the public, a vanished vessel is a story without a final chapter. Atalanta became the prototype for all of these interpretations. By the late 20th century, the Atalanta's story had spread far beyond naval historians. She appeared in children's books, mystery anthologies, maritime lore collections, documentary series, travel magazines, academic conferences, early internet forums, cultural discussions about unexplained events. People compared her to Amelia Earhart's disappearance, the vanishing of the Franklin expedition, the lost Roanoke colony, modern aircraft lost over oceans, deep-sea vanishings near Japan, ships swallowed by the Indian Ocean. Her mystery became universal. She was no longer just a British ship. She had become a symbol of all disappearances, a global icon of the ocean's silence. There is a biological and psychological explanation for why the Atalanta and similar mysteries captivate us. Psychologically, humans are wired to seek patterns. When something breaks the pattern, such as a ship vanishing without reason, the brain tries desperately to fill the gap. Biologically, fear of the unknown is an evolutionary survival mechanism. The mind reacts strongly to ambiguous danger, incomplete information, and visible threats. The Atalanta embodies all 3. Culturally, every society has lost stories. Missing explorers, vanished tribes, lost caravans, sunken fleets. Atalanta fits into this universal human narrative. Emotionally, we empathize with the idea of being lost without a trace. It touches something primal. Though she predates the Bermuda Triangle myth by almost 2 centuries, modern researchers call the Atalanta the Triangle's first ghost, the foundational disappearance, the original case 0, the silent prologue. She is the earliest piece of evidence that ships were vanishing in this region long before we gave it a name. Her disappearance is like the first note of music that builds into a symphony, the first small tremor before a series of quakes. And because she is the earliest case, she carries symbolic weight. She is the beginning of the mystery. But the story is not over. We still have more to tell. By now, after examining the Atalanta's technical history, her scientific context, her comparisons to other vanishings, and her place within maritime lore, we arrive at the most elusive layer of all, the metaphysical meaning of her disappearance. Because the Atalanta is more than a wooden sloop, a British naval vessel, a casualty of the Atlantic, a data point in maritime archives, she has become something far more significant, a symbol of the unknowable. History explains what happened. Science explains how it might have happened, but neither answers the deeper question: why does the Atalanta remain in our collective imagination at all? Why this ship? Why this story? Why this silence? To understand this, we must look not at the ocean but at ourselves. In every ancient civilization, the ocean represented chaos, danger, the void, the edge of the world, the subconscious, the spiritual unknown. Before maps, the sea was a horizon of possibility, both wonder and death. In ancient myth, the Greeks believed the sea held hidden gods and monstrous forces. Polynesian sailors told stories of islands that vanished beneath waves. Norse sagas described oceans as gateways to other realms. Hindu cosmology imagined the ocean as the primordial chaos from which the universe emerged. The ocean was the birthplace of creation and the keeper of secrets. When Atalanta disappeared, she didn't simply sink, she entered that symbolic oceanic realm of the unknown. She crossed the threshold older than history itself, and that's why her story resonates even now. She reminds us of a symbolism we have carried for thousands of years. What is more terrifying than death? A death we cannot explain. Not knowing is an agony older than language. Psychologists call this the fear of the unseen, the horror of the void, the trauma of unresolved endings. Anthropologists note that every culture views unexplained disappearance as sacred or cursed, something set apart. Human beings crave closure, even false closure, just to avoid the abyss of uncertainty. The Atalanta gives us none. She is a question without an answer, a story without a final chapter, a tragedy without remains, a journey without a return, a mystery without boundaries. And this is exactly why she survives as a symbol. She represents the human struggle with the unknowable. A paradox lies at the heart of the Atalanta's fate. By disappearing completely, the Atalanta actually became more present in human culture. There is a psychological truth here. What vanishes grows larger in memory than what remains. A shipwreck found on the seafloor becomes history. A shipwreck never found becomes myth. The more the sea hides, the more the mind reveals. The Atalanta's silence became a story, a warning, a riddle, a metaphor. The sea took the ship but gave back a legend. The Bermuda Triangle is not a scientific region. It is a cultural one. It exists not on maps, but in minds. And like all mythic landscapes, from El Dorado to Atlantis, it needed an origin story. Atalanta became one of the earliest pieces of that foundation. Even though she predates the modern myth by centuries, her disappearance retroactively became part of it. She is the prelude to a story the world would tell centuries later. Think of mythic landscapes. The Greeks had the underworld. The Vikings had Midgard and its boundaries. Medieval Europe had the edge of the world. Modern culture has the Bermuda Triangle, and the Atalanta is one of the oldest ghosts wandering inside that modern mythological space. In literature and philosophy, fate is represented by abandoned roads, unfinished stories, missing letters, unsolved crimes, lost travelers, unreturned ships. The Atalanta is a classic symbol of fate's unpredictability. Her story shows that not everything ends in resolution, not every journey ends in return, not every mystery has a key, not every event fits into human logic. She is a reminder that the universe is not bound to give us answers simply because we seek them. This is both terrifying and liberating. Atalanta teaches a cosmic humility. What does a vanishing tell us? It reveals the boundary of human knowledge. In every century, humans have believed they were approaching total understanding. Medieval sailors thought they knew the world's limits. Victorians believed science would explain everything. The 20th century believed technology would conquer all. Today we imagine satellites see everything, yet ships still vanish. Planes disappear. People go missing. The ocean remains vast enough to hide entire worlds. The Atalanta reminds us that progress does not erase mystery. It only changes its shape. Humans do not tolerate emptiness. We fill it with stories, symbols, legends, theories, emotions, ghosts. This myth-making instinct is ancient and universal. When confronted with the abyss, people throughout time have responded by inventing meaning. The Atalanta's perfect disappearance is fertile ground for this instinct. That's why people attribute to her supernatural explanations, paranormal theories, metaphysical interpretations, cursed narratives, or mystical significance. But while these interpretations are not supported by history, they reveal a deep truth. We create stories to protect ourselves from the terror of the unknown. The Atalanta became the story we built around a silence too big to understand. Even modern audiences, living in an era of science and technology, feel a strange pull toward the Atalanta's disappearance. This is because she symbolizes the fragility of our knowledge, the humility demanded by nature, the persistence of mystery, the boundary between explanation and wonder, the psychological fear of disappearing. and the unspoken truth that the world is larger than our comprehension. We may map the stars and model storms and send robots to the deepest trenches, but the ocean can still take a ship and keep it forever. Atalanta reminds us that mystery is not the enemy of knowledge. It is the shadow that gives knowledge its shape. Without the unknown, there is no discovery. Without silence, there is no story. Without vanishing, there is no legend. Atalanta is that legend. Most ships lost at sea vanish twice, first physically, and then in memory. The HMS Atalanta did not follow this pattern. Her physical disappearance was absolute, but her memory refused to die. Instead of fading, she expanded, drifting into new contexts, new eras, new conversations. A ship that could not return home found a way to travel through history. In the centuries after her loss, she became a cautionary tale among sailors, a footnote in naval archives, a curiosity for maritime scholars, a symbol of early triangle disappearances, a metaphor in philosophical studies, a ghost in documentaries, a reference point in debates about mystery and science. The Atalanta became more alive in absence than most ships ever become in presence. For more than 100 years, Atalanta lived quietly in naval registries. Her details, name, launch date, duties, capture and recapture, disappearance. A simple ledger entry. No embellishment, no myth. But the 20th century rediscovered her. As disappearances like USS Cyclops, Flight 19, the Marine Sulphur Queen, captured public imagination, researchers traced the phenomenon backward through time, looking for the oldest cases that matched the same pattern. And there she was, a ghost hiding inside the oldest pages of naval history, a British warship lost in the same region long before modern technology existed and long before the legend had a name. When historians connected these dots, Atalanta resurfaced, not from the ocean, but from obscurity. She became a candidate for the first recorded vanishing in what the world would later call the Bermuda Triangle. This transformed her story, from forgotten ship to foundational mystery. Once rediscovered, Atalanta drew the attention of mystery writers, maritime historians, documentary scriptwriters, folklore authors, novelists, speculative historians. Writers used her as a symbol of loss, a metaphor for unpredictability, an example of the sea's indifference, a narrative doorway into larger mysteries. In novels, she appears as a ghost ship returning in dreams, a cursed vessel lost to time, a tragic emblem of human fragility. In nonfiction, she becomes the earliest documented triangle case, the proto-ghost, the mother of maritime mysteries. Many writers highlight that her disappearance predates the triangle myth by nearly 2 centuries, giving weight to the idea that the oceanic region was feared long before popular culture made it famous. Her story became a plot device, a literary tool, a symbol embedded in modern storytelling. Since the 1970s, Atalanta has appeared in History Channel specials, BBC maritime episodes, Discovery Channel investigations, National Geographic deep-sea reports, independent film documentaries, YouTube long-form histories, academic lecture recordings. She is often positioned as the earliest case of a Bermuda-region vanishing, and even though the triangle concept is not scientific, the storytelling power of placing Atalanta at its beginning is undeniable. Visual media emphasize her age, fragility, the era's lack of navigation technology, the violence of storms of that period, the complete lack of evidence left behind. These adaptations keep the Atalanta alive in the collective modern imagination. She is no longer only a ship, she is a chapter in a cultural narrative. In scientific circles, the Atalanta is used not for her mystique, but for her data pattern. Researchers studying maritime disappearances reference her case because 1. She represents one of the earliest fully documented vanishings. 2. Her route is part of a high-risk, high-variance ocean corridor. 3. Her structural weaknesses were typical of wooden war sloops. 4. Her lack of debris aligns with deep-ocean trench behavior. 5. Her time frame matches known periods of violent Atlantic storms. Oceanographers use her to illustrate drift patterns, Gulf Stream dispersion, coral reef hazards, the physics of shipbreak-apart events, the behavior of aging wooden hulls. In other words, her mystery is valuable not because it is unsolved, but because it is so perfectly representative of the type of mystery science studies. The Atalanta is a case zero not only for legend but for legitimate academic analysis. Every culture has stories of vanished travelers, missing caravans, lost expeditions, ships swallowed by storms, armies that disappeared in deserts, aviators lost in unexplained circumstances. The Atalanta fits into this universal narrative. She embodies the fear of the unseen, the uncharted, the unresolved, the irretrievable. But there is a subtle difference that makes her unique. Her disappearance is complete. No remains, no fragments, no eyewitnesses, no conflicting reports, no final position, just silence. This silence transforms her from a historical object into a psychological one. She is not merely lost at sea. She is lost within the human psyche. Surprisingly, the Atalanta appears in philosophical commentary as a symbol of existential uncertainty, the fragility of human plans, the limits of knowledge, the inevitability of mystery, the tension between order and chaos, the humility forced upon humanity by nature. Writers and thinkers use her disappearance to express ideas such as, what is lost without witness becomes infinite, silence is the ocean's vocabulary. A disappearance is a mirror. Reflecting our ignorance, she becomes a metaphor for the boundary between what we can understand and what we must accept. Before Atalanta, disappearances were recorded as accidents, misfortunes, tragedies. After her rediscovery in modern times, people reinterpreted her story as part of a larger pattern. Her case helps define the template for modern maritime myths. 1. A ship entering a dangerous region. 2. Sudden disappearance. 3. No distress signal. 4. No debris. 5. No survivors. 6. No witnesses. 7. A region known for violent storms. 8. A ship with known structural issues. 9. A timeline consistent with hazardous weather. This template has been applied to Cyclops Flight 19, the Carol A. Deering, the Marine Sulphur Queen, various fishing fleets, private yachts, missing aircraft, but Atalanta remains the first case where the template fits perfectly. She is the origin point. The Atalanta occupies a unique position. She is both real and symbolic. Her historical facts are solid. Her naval records exist. Her service is documented. Her disappearance is confirmed. Yet her legacy belongs not to the archives but to the mythic imagination. She exists now in the same category as the Flying Dutchman, Atlantis, the Ghost Galleon legends, Lost Explorers, Mysterious Islands, unexplained vanishings, supernatural maritime stories. But unlike those myths, the Atalanta is entirely real. She is a living paradox, a documented ship turned into an undocumentable mystery. Her absence became her immortality. The story of the HMS Atalanta does not end with answers. It ends with the same thing that claimed the ship itself: silence. But this silence is not empty. It is full of echoes of centuries of fascination, fear, wonder, speculation, and reverence. As we reach the end of this journey, we realize something profound. The Atalanta's disappearance is not a puzzle to solve. It is a lesson to contemplate, a reminder that the ocean is older, deeper, and more mysterious than our brief presence upon it. A reminder that some stories remain unwritten because the sea does not release them. A reminder that humanity's search for meaning will always collide with the unknown. The Atalanta is not only a ship lost in a specific time and place. She is a symbol of all mysteries we may never uncover. Throughout history, the Atalanta's name surfaced again and again, not as a naval success but as a whispered warning. Sailors invoked her memory when crossing dangerous waters. Remember the Atalanta, some seas keep what they take. Her story became a quiet lighthouse, not shining light to guide ships but projecting darkness to remind sailors the ocean does not negotiate. In the 18th century, her loss signaled the fragility of wooden ships, the violence of the Atlantic, the limits of navigation, the consequences of structural age. In the 19th century, she influenced literature, folklore, early maritime myths. In the 20th century, she helped build the foundation of the Bermuda Triangle legend, discussions on missing ships, scientific hypotheses about ocean disappearances. And today, in the 21st century, she stands as an early maritime mystery, a philosophical symbol, a scientific reference point, an echo of human limitation. A ship that once sailed quietly became a beacon of mystery for all who came after her. Humans have always sought to illuminate darkness, with torches, with science, with instruments, with reason. But when we encounter mysteries like Atalanta's, we confront the limits of our illumination. Even with today's technology, satellites cannot scan the deep ocean floor, sonar cannot map every trench, radar cannot peer into history, and no machine can resurrect a vanished ship. Yet the desire to search persists. Why? Because mystery is not a failure of understanding. It is an invitation to continue seeking. The Atalanta does not frustrate us, she inspires us. Her silence does not defeat inquiry, it fuels it. If everything were knowable, there would be nothing left to explore. Her disappearance reminds us that exploration is endless, knowledge is fragile, and the ocean is infinitely larger than our certainty. Despite sinking into an abyss of water and time, the Atalanta never fully disappeared. She lingers in archives, myths, discussions, documentaries, scientific research, philosophical reflections, the human imagination. A ship forgotten for centuries now lives more vividly than many vessels that returned safely to port. This is the paradox of disappearance. Vanishing sometimes creates immortality. The Atalanta left no wreckage, so she left a story. She left no survivors, so she left questions. She left no traces, so she left curiosity. And curiosity is one of the most enduring forces in human history. In the beginning of this documentary, we approached the Atalanta as a mystery to be deciphered. Now at the end, we can see her as something else entirely, a teacher. Her disappearance teaches humility. We are small in the face of nature. Respect, the sea demands caution, not arrogance. Acceptance, some stories will never be complete. Curiosity, the unknown, is not a threat, it is an invitation. Courage, exploration requires confronting uncertainty. Memory, the past echoes far into the future. She teaches that loss can generate understanding, and that searching can be more powerful than finding. The Atalanta's fate is not merely a tragedy, It is a lesson carved into the waves. Closure is a human invention. Nature does not provide it. The sea especially does not. The Atalanta's families never had closure. The Royal Navy never had closure. Her crew's descendants never had closure. History never had closure. And perhaps that is the point. Some stories are not designed to end neatly. Some answers are not meant to be found. And that truth forces us to confront our own discomfort with uncertainty. Atalanta is a mirror that reflects our internal struggle with the unsolved. She reminds us that closure is emotional, not factual. We crave it, but the world owes it to no one. Throughout this documentary, we explored the scientific, psychological, cultural, and philosophical layers of the Atalanta's story. Now we understand the Atalanta does not belong exclusively to science, history, myth, or philosophy. She belongs to all of them. She stands at the crossroads where fact meets narrative, science meets uncertainty, logic meets awe, history meets legend. She is the point where explanation ends and mystery begins. This is why her story feels eternal. It cannot be contained in one discipline, one interpretation, one category. She is too complex for that. Too silent, too vast. Just like the ocean, there is a beautiful yet haunting truth. The ocean is the largest graveyard in the world and the largest museum. It holds broken masts, shattered hulls, swallowed cities, drowned men, forgotten empires, lost knowledge, untold stories. But unlike a museum, it does not label or display its artifacts. It guards them. The Atalanta is one such artifact, a piece of history locked in the ocean's private archive. Maybe she rests in a trench deeper than any diver can reach. Maybe she lies shattered on a coral shelf. Maybe she decayed entirely into nothing, but wherever she is, the ocean keeps her, and perhaps that is where she belongs. The HMS Atalanta's disappearance is more than a historical event. It is a story about human curiosity, human fear, the limits of knowledge, the power of myth, the beauty of mystery, the humility demanded by the ocean, and the fragile place of humanity within nature. She is a reminder that we do not control the world, we only sail across it. We do not command the ocean, we negotiate with it. We do not conquer mystery, we coexist with it. The Atalanta's silence is not a failure of understanding, it is a testament to the universe's vastness. And in that vastness, every disappearance becomes a story that outlives the ship it describes.